What is your name?
Kris Kringle.
Do you believe that you're Santa Claus?
Of course.
That's not true.
What is your name?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't introduce myself. I do beg your pardon. You're Mr. Collins. I'm Mr. Kringle, Kris Kringle.
Tell me, Mr. Kringle, do you believe that you are Santa Claus?
Yes, of course.
He's crazy too.
Could you be Santa Claus? Have you had any experience?
Oh, a little. I'm Santa Claus.
I know how this all works.
I tell her that there is no Santa Claus.
You bring her down here and she sees hundreds of gullible children.
Truth is one of the most important things in the world.
Good, because I always tell the absolute truth.
But you don't believe in me. I could make you believe.
There's still hope.
Our department will sell more toys than it ever has. He's a born salesman.
It's the way they commercialize Christmas.
Your Santa's telling everybody where to go shop.
Why didn't you think of this?
It's the greatest goodwill policy I ever heard of.
Christmas isn't just a day. It's a frame of mind.
He's crazy. He thinks he is Santa Claus.
He's not really Santa Claus.
What's wrong? He must be Santa.
He should be placed in a mental institution.
I want you to help him.
I intend to prove that Mr. Kringle is Santa Claus.
He has not even established that there is such a person as Santa Claus.
Do you believe in Santa Claus?
How can I seriously rule
That there is a Santa Claus.
Faith is believing in things when common sense tells you not to.
The original Miracle on 34th Street, directed by George Seaton, has become a classic film that's watched yearly by millions. It's consistently ranked as one of the best holiday films of all time. There's a reason why the original Miracle has become such a beloved film. Because it's a great movie. As if you didn't know the story, Macy's annual Thanksgiving parade is about to get rolling when Doris Walker, the organizer, is in need of a Santa Claus. As luck would have it, she recruits Kris Kringle to fill in. Being so good at the job, Kris gets hired full-time at Macy's, but Doris soon realizes Kris really believes he's Santa Claus. Uh-oh. As Kris's selfless demeanor and good intentions turn the institution of retail upside down, he vows to make Doris and her daughter Susan welcome a little faith into their lives and get them to believe in Santa Claus. Of course, there's always a bump in the road. Kris is declared crazy and a final courtroom hearing is left to determine if Kris is indeed the one and only Santa Claus. Will Kris be set free? Will Doris join in as one of Kris's believers? Will Susan ever grasp the concept of imagination? And how long will Macy's and Gimbel's be buddy-buddy? I'm betting that would end as soon as Christmas does. There's no way they would do this year-round. One of the things that makes Miracle so good is the simple story. It's a fantasy, but it doesn't need any glossy settings or special effects to engulf you into it. Most of the film takes place in bland offices and apartments. Even the courtroom is pretty dull looking. But the exchanges between the characters and the ideas in the film is what gives it such an impact. What could have been an extremely sappy, overwritten story is given some real sincerity by the actors. Maureen O'Hara is a divorcee, very cutting edge for the time, is gorgeous and has a believable stubbornness that needs to be broken down. John Payne has a nice, easygoing, optimistic attitude. Unlike a lot of child actors, Natalie Wood doesn't appear to be instructed to play up her cuteness as being the lead kid, and she feels more like a real little girl and less a child actor. And the supporting parts are all played by unique-looking character actors. It seems back during this time period, character actors had much more distinct, memorable faces.
Your Honor, I protest. Overruled.
One of my favorite performances is Gene Lockhart as Judge Harper. I just think he's so funny in this. When he starts leaning towards ruling for Chris during the hearing, the dismissive looks he gives to the prosecutor crack me up every time.
But it hardly has any bearing on this case.
It has a great deal, Your Honor, if I may be allowed to proceed.
By all means, Mr. Gailey.
How great is that? And of course we have Edmund Gwynn in his Oscar-winning role. And he's great. He sort of ruined all movie Santas for me since first seeing him as Kris Kringle. He has a very warm presence whenever he's around. Except when he clobbers Mr. Sawyer. Don't mess with Santa. But throughout the film he has this very childlike innocence and curiosity that's very endearing.
You enjoy impersonating me?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
What sort of games do you play with the other children in the apartment building here?
Are you happy at home, Mr. Sawyer?
That will be all, Mr. Kringle.
At times he does act like a big kid, which I suppose is pretty appropriate for Santa Claus.
You don't have any faith in me, do you?
It's not a question of faith, it's just common sense.
The whole theme of faith and believing isn't overdone. In fact, a lot of the characters come clean in admitting they do believe Chris is Santa Claus, not because they really believe it, but because it's in their best interest to say it. There really aren't any bad guys in the film. Well, I guess Mr. Sawyer would be. I still don't understand what kind of shrink he's supposed to be.
How many days in the week?
Beverly?
Who was the first president of the United States? George Washington.
What kind of psychological test is that? There's a lot of great scenes in the film. The Dutch orphan, Susan and Chris imagining they're monkeys, Santa trying some bubblegum, Macy's and Gimbels coming together, the drunk Santa, Susan's Christmas wish, the court hearing, the letters, and the finale. Really great film.
Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in one horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle bells.
There have been several remakes of the film. Even some of the original cast performed the story again on radio. But the biggest, most popular remake was done by writer-producer John Hughes and director Les Mayfield. Other than a few new plot elements and some updates being done, the 1994 remake is essentially the same film. So much so that I wonder why it was even made.
Make a buck, make a buck.
One of the key components in the original was the use of Macy's and its rival Gimbels. By 1994, Gimbels was long gone, and Macy's didn't want to be associated with the remake. I think a smart move on their part. So from the start, the film wouldn't have the real-world history that everyone associates with the story. The parade, the store, the location. Instead of using this obstacle to their advantage, by forcing the filmmakers to really revamp the story, maybe set the story in a different city, a small town, or have Chris be hired as a mall Santa. That would be kind of timely nowadays. They went about creating their own New York department store and a parade. Kohl's. Not that Kohl's. And they stuck it at the same address as the original. They could have easily called this movie A Pretty Amazing Thing at Lexington and 3rd. In my mind, it's nearly impossible to not be in the shadow of Edmund Gwynn's Santa Claus. But Richard Attenborough does do a pretty decent job with his Santa. He's probably the best performance in the film. The rest of the cast are all pretty bland. Elizabeth Perkins and Dylan McDermott are both very attractive-looking leads, but they're both pretty flat characters, and way too much emphasis is placed on the romantic angle in the story. Mara Wilson does a typical kid kind of performance. I'm so cute, but still very precocious kind of act that kid actors often do. I don't really think she's very special in the film. She doesn't feel as genuine or real as Natalie Wood's Susan. All the actors just don't click the way they did in the original. The film has a bigger is better kind of approach. Instead of just seeing a handful of supporters, now we witness the whole city rooting for Chris. Gimbels was simply trying to compete for customers against Macy's. Now the sinister Shoppers Express wants to take over Kohl's. Can you tell he's a bad guy, or is this too subtle? Every time I see this guy, I can only think of him plotting Riggs and Murtaugh's death.
Diplomatic community!
Susan just doesn't want a house anymore. Now she wants a daddy and a brother. While Fred wanted to win the affection of Doris, now Brian has to try to marry her. This marriage proposal seems like it comes way too soon, even for a movie. The court hearing is extended with more witnesses, and even a reindeer shows up this time. J.T. Walsh, who was a master at playing bad guys, gives one of his dastardly performances here. He's the best part about all the court scenes. The famous resolution of Chris's verdict is changed up here, and not for the better. This new one doesn't have the same emotional wallop as the original did, and it certainly doesn't have the visual impact of it either. I don't know why they bothered changing it. All the changes they did do didn't help the story. Some actually hurt it.
You got a thing for the little ones, huh? Huh? Because they ain't much good for nothing else, are they?
I have no idea why they felt compelled to include that allusion in a light family holiday film. They could have left that out. It's just creepy.
At the 34th Street store.
Without any apparent provocation, struck him.
Probably the most annoying thing I find about this film is the use of all the music throughout it. It is such an exhausting tool the film goes back to using over.
He's not real.
And over. And over again. The original film was able to manipulate my emotions without using all this overwrought, sentimental music coming in every 5 minutes. The story, characters, and performances were strong enough that they didn't have to rely on it. Here, it's all the time. I get more choked up at the simple, scoreless scene of Chris speaking with the little Dutch orphan than anything in this remake, whether it's accompanied by music or not. I suppose it's not an awful film. It tries really hard to be liked, and it's got an old-fashioned vibe about it. It's much better than the 1973 TV movie version, which I found practically unwatchable. The only good thing about that one is the curiosity factor, seeing 70 stars pop up in roles. Oh, and they show the underdog balloon. That was my favorite balloon when I was little. Can't they find enough room for him in the parade to bring him back? He's so cool. Oh, the rest of the movie is putrid, and it just felt like I was watching a whacked-out, bargain basement, surreal version of Miracle, with a bunch of actors in bad clothes. None of the remakes I've seen have been able to come close to capturing the magic of the original Miracle on 34th Street. It's still as charming and uplifting as when it was first released. It's done fine on its own and never needed new versions of it to attract audiences to it. And it will probably continue to be loved by new generations of movie fans who will watch it every year around the holidays. All the remakes that have followed in its wake are just insignificant footnotes to the original classic.
But maybe he's only a little crazy, like painters or composers or some of those men in Washington.